Bring her to me. Adrian Valenti said it once, flat and quiet, and the room went so silent that Marcus Reyes could hear his own heartbeat. No one in that building had heard the boss say 4 words in a row in over a year. Marcus set down the folder in his hands like it might explode. "Boss, you sure?" Adrian didn't blink. "I said what I said. Find her. Bring her to me. Tonight." 3 years of silence broken by a woman who didn't even know his name yet. Before we go any further, if you're watching this from your city tonight, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. It genuinely means the world to see how far these stories travel, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss where this one goes. Now let's get into it. Marcus had worked for Adrian Valenti for 11 years, and in all that time he had learned exactly 2 things about the man. Never question an order twice, and never mistake his silence for weakness. So when Adrian stood from his desk that night, walked to the window overlooking the harbor and said nothing else, Marcus didn't push. He just turned and left the office, already dialing the men who would spend the rest of the night tearing through public records, hospital files, and old case reports to find one woman named Elena Carter. Adrian stayed at the window long after the door clicked shut. He didn't move for almost 20 minutes. He wasn't looking at the city lights. He was looking at nothing at all, replaying a single image over and over: a woman on her knees, on a wet concrete floor, hands pressed against a stranger's bleeding side, refusing to stop, even when someone screamed at her that the man dying in her arms belonged to the most dangerous family in the city. 6 hours earlier, none of this had made sense to anyone. The clinic where it happened sat in a part of the city most people avoided after dark, a place kept alive by volunteers and donated supplies, and one exhausted woman who refused to close its doors, no matter how late it got. Elena Carter had been on her feet since 6 that morning. She was tired in the way that lived in her bones, now the kind of tired that came from working 2 jobs just to keep a place that barely broke even. She was rewrapping gauze on an elderly man's hand when the door burst open, and 2 men half-carried, half-dragged a 3rd man inside, blood soaking through his shirt. "He's not going to make it to a hospital," one of them said. "Help him or he dies right here." Elena didn't hesitate. She never did. That was the thing about her that nobody in her old life had ever understood. Not her former hospital, not the board that fired her, not the man whose crime she refused to bury. She didn't calculate risk when someone was bleeding out in front of her. She just moved. "Get him on the table, now. Talk to me what happened." "Doesn't matter what happened," the older of the 2 men snapped. "Just fix him." "It matters if I need to know what I'm dealing with?" Elena shot back, already cutting away fabric, already pressing down hard against a wound that was bleeding faster than it should have been. "Gunshot." Silence. "That's a yes," she muttered. Okay, stay with me. What's his name?" "Tommy." "Tommy, look at me. Stay awake. You hear me? Eyes on me." The younger of the 2 men, barely into his 20s, terrified in a way that told Elena he wasn't used to this kind of violence, yet kept glancing at the door like he expected it to be kicked in any second. "You don't understand who we work for," he said, voice shaking. "If he dies, it's not just him who's in trouble." "Nobody's dying tonight," Elena said, not even looking up. "Not on my table." That was the moment the 3rd man walked in. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The 2 men who had carried Tommy in went rigid the instant the door opened again, straightening like soldiers under inspection. Elena barely registered him. At first, she was too focused on stopping the bleeding, on counting Tommy's pulse under her fingers, on keeping her voice calm, so the young one panicking by the door didn't spiral further. "Report," the new arrival said. Just one word. Low. Controlled. "She's got him stable, sir." "Barely." Elena finally looked up just for a second. Just long enough to register a man in an expensive dark coat, standing perfectly still near the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't read at all. No panic. No relief. Nothing. Just watching. "You're not helping," she said sharply. "Either put pressure here or get out of my light." Adrian Valenti did not get out of her light. He didn't move for a long moment, and something about his stillness unsettled her more than the blood on the floor did. Then, without a word, he crouched beside the table and pressed 2 fingers against the wound exactly where she directed him, exactly as firm as she needed, like he'd done this before. "Good," she said, surprised despite herself. "Keep that pressure. Don't let go no matter what." "I won't." Something in the way he said it made her glance at him again. 2 words. That was all he'd given her since he walked through that door, and yet the 2 men behind him were staring at him like he'd just performed a miracle. It would be hours before Elena understood why. She worked on Tommy for almost 40 minutes, calling out instructions, refusing every offer of money the younger man kept trying to shove into her hands for her trouble. She didn't want money. She wanted him to stop bleeding. When Tommy's pulse finally steadied and his breathing evened out, she sat back on her heels, hands trembling with adrenaline, and looked up to find the man in the dark coat still there. Still watching her, the same way he had the entire time. "He's going to need a real hospital eventually. I can only do so much here," she said. "But he'll survive the drive now." "Thank you," Adrian said. 2 words again. But this time something shifted behind his eyes. Something Elena couldn't name and didn't have time to think about, because the younger man was already trying to hand her an envelope thick with cash, and she was already refusing it, and Adrian was already watching that refusal with an intensity that made the air in the room feel different. "I don't want your money," Elena said, wiping her hands on a towel, exhaustion finally catching up to her voice. "I want you to get him somewhere safe and not come back here unless it's an emergency. This clinic doesn't need whatever trouble follows you." "Understood," Adrian said. And then he did something none of his men had ever seen him do in 3 years. He looked directly at Elena, held her gaze for 1 long second, like he was memorizing her face, and said quietly, "What's your name? Why does it matter? It matters." She hesitated. Some instinct telling her this wasn't a man used to being told no, and yet not a single part of him was threatening her. If anything, he looked almost stunned by his own question. "Elena," she said finally. "Elena Carter." He said nothing else. He helped carry Tommy to the car himself, which the 2 men found so strange that they exchanged a look behind his back, and then he was gone, disappearing into the night without another word. Elena didn't think about it again until 3 days later, when a black car pulled up outside her apartment, and Marcus Reyes stepped out holding a folder with her entire life inside it. "Miss Carter," he said, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About the man whose employee you saved. He'd like to speak with you." Elena crossed her arms. "Tell him I don't need a thank you card." "He's not sending a thank you card." Marcus's voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something careful, like a man handling something more fragile than he was letting on. "Miss Carter, I need you to understand the man I work for doesn't ask to meet people, ever. In 11 years, I have never once seen him request a meeting with someone outside our organization. Not once. Then he can make an exception for someone else. He specifically asked for you. That stopped her." "Why?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, and something about his honesty unsettled her more than a lie would have. "Nobody does. Which is exactly why I'm asking you to come, because whatever's going on in his head right now, this is the first time in 3 years he's shown interest in anything outside of business. And I'd like to understand it before something goes wrong." "That's not exactly reassuring." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's not." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing every instinct she had. She'd learned the hard way what happened when powerful men decided they wanted something. She'd lost her career to a man like that, a surgeon with connections deep enough to bury a malpractice cover-up and destroy the one nurse who refused to sign off on his lie. She knew exactly what it looked like when the powerful reached down and pulled ordinary people into their orbit, and it never ended well for the ordinary person. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said finally. "I understand." Marcus didn't push. He simply set a card on the small table by her door. "If you change your mind, that number reaches me directly. And Miss Carter, for what it's worth, I don't think he means you harm. I've just never seen him want anything before. I don't think even he knows what he wants yet." He left. Elena stood in her doorway for a long time after the car pulled away, staring at the card, telling herself she wasn't going to call it. She lasted 4 days. It wasn't curiosity that finally made her pick up the phone. It was an eviction notice taped to the clinic's front door, and a message from her landlord about back rent on her apartment stacking on top of each other in the same terrible week, reminding her exactly how thin the ground beneath her had become since she lost everything for telling the truth. She hated herself a little for it, but she dialed the number anyway. "This is Elena Carter," she said when Marcus picked up. "I'll hear him out. Once. That's all I'm agreeing to." That's all he's asking for. The meeting was set for the following evening, and Elena spent every hour before it convincing herself she was making a mistake, and then convincing herself she had no other choice. When the car arrived, she almost didn't get in. When she finally did, her hands were shaking, though she refused to let it show on her face. The place they took her to felt less like a home and more like a fortress dressed up as one, though Elena wasn't looking at furniture or windows or any of it. She was looking at the men stationed at every door, the careful distance they kept from each other, the way conversations dropped the second she walked past. This was not the world of a businessman. She understood with a cold drop in her stomach exactly what kind of man she'd agreed to meet. Adrian was waiting for her in a room at the end of a long hallway, standing exactly the way he'd stood at the clinic 3 days earlier, still controlled, watching the door before she even reached it, as if he'd been counting the seconds since Marcus told him she was on her way. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't." "I know." "Then you should also know I'm not staying long. I have a clinic to run and people who actually need my help. So, whatever this is, say it." Something flickered across his face. Not anger. Something closer to admiration buried under years of practice at hiding exactly what he felt. "You didn't ask for money at the clinic," he said. "You didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask what would happen to you for helping one of my men. Why? Because a man was bleeding to death in front of me. That's the only question that mattered. Most people would have asked the other questions first." "I'm not most people." "No," Adrian said quietly. "You're not." Elena crossed her arms, refusing to let the strange weight in his voice unsettle her. "Is that why I'm here? Because I didn't ask questions?" "You're here," Adrian said, "because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that night, and I don't understand why, and I don't like not understanding things." The honesty in it startled her more than any threat could have. She'd braced herself for intimidation, for a veiled warning for the kind of controlled menace she imagined men like him used instead of raising their voice. She had not braced herself for this, a dangerous man admitting plainly that a stranger had gotten under his skin, and he didn't know what to do about it. "That's not my problem," she said, even as something in her chest tightened. "I know," Adrian said. "I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking you to stay long enough to let me figure out why it's happening. I told you, I have a clinic. A clinic that's about to be shut down over back rent you can't cover," Adrian said, and Elena's whole body went cold. "I know things about people, Miss Carter. It's part of how I survive. I know your landlord filed papers 2 days ago. I know you've been sleeping 4 hours a night trying to hold that place together on 2 incomes that barely cover one person's expenses. I know exactly how close you are to losing everything you've spent your life building since the hospital destroyed your career for refusing to lie for a man with more money than conscience." Elena's jaw tightened. "You had someone dig through my life." "Yes. That's not something to be proud of." "I'm not proud of it," Adrian said, and for the first time, his voice lost some of its control. "I'm telling you because I don't know how else to make you understand that I'm not asking you to owe me anything. I'm offering to help. That's all this is. Men like you don't offer help without wanting something back." "You're right," Adrian said. "I do want something." Elena's stomach dropped, every warning instinct she owned firing at once. "Then say it. I want to know why a woman with nothing left to gain, still chooses to save strangers instead of protecting herself. I want to understand that because I used to be someone who believed in that too, before this life took it from me. And when I watched you on that floor doing everything you could for a man you had no reason to help, for one moment I remembered what that used to feel like." His voice dropped lower, rougher, like the words cost him something to say out loud. "I haven't felt anything in 3 years, Miss Carter. Not since the people I trusted most destroyed everything I loved. And then I watched you save a stranger's life for nothing, and for the first time since then, I felt something again. I don't know what to do with that. I just know I'm not ready to let it disappear." The room went silent. Elena stood frozen, every instinct in her screaming to run, and something else, something quieter and far more dangerous, keeping her rooted exactly where she was. "That's not an offer," she said, finally quieter now. "That's a confession. Maybe it's both." Before she could answer, the door at the far end of the hallway slammed open and Marcus appeared, breathless, his expression tight with an urgency that made Adrian's entire posture change in an instant. "Boss, we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Marcus's eyes flicked to Elena, hesitating. "Say it," Adrian ordered. "It's about her," Marcus said. The name came back on the background check. Elena Carter's father, the one who died 8 years ago in that warehouse fire the papers called an accident. He paused, and the pause alone made the temperature in the room drop. It wasn't an accident. And the man who ordered it worked for the same organization that destroyed your family 3 years ago. Adrian went very still. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. "What are you talking about?" "My father died in an accident. I was there. I saw the report." "The report was written to look like an accident," Marcus said carefully, "because the people responsible didn't want anyone asking questions. And Miss Carter, the man who gave that order, is the same man who's been circling Adrian's organization for the last several weeks, trying to find a weakness he can exploit." Elena felt sick. "Say his name." Marcus hesitated, glancing at Adrian, who gave the smallest nod. "Victor Kessler." Elena's whole body went cold. She knew that name. It was the same man whose crime she'd refused to cover up at the hospital. 8 years, no wait, she thought. Mind-reeling dates, colliding the timeline, suddenly rearranging itself into something far darker than she'd ever imagined. Victor Kessler wasn't just the surgeon who had destroyed her career. He was the reason her father was dead. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It's not," Adrian said quietly, and something in his voice had changed completely, the careful control replaced by something sharper, colder, more dangerous than anything she'd seen in him yet. "Because Victor Kessler is also the man responsible for what happened to my family 3 years ago. Which means whatever brought you into that clinic that night, whatever led you to my man bleeding on that floor." He stopped, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "It wasn't luck," he finished. "It was him. He's been circling both of us for years without either of us knowing it. And now that he knows you're standing in this room with me, Elena, he's not going to let that go unanswered." Marcus's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for 3 seconds, and his face drained of color. "Boss," he said, voice tight. "Kessler's men were spotted outside her clinic 20 minutes ago." Elena's heart stopped. "The people I work with," she said, breathless. "The patients. If he's there—" "We move now," Adrian said, already turning, already becoming someone entirely different from the man who had just confessed something raw and unguarded 30 seconds earlier. This was the man the whole city feared. This was the silent king, reawakened cold fury, replacing every ounce of vulnerability he'd shown her. "Marcus, get the car. Elena, you're coming with us. I'm not leaving my clinic to burn while I hide somewhere safe." "You're not hiding," Adrian said, already moving toward the door, voice hard as steel. "You're coming because you know that building better than anyone, and I'm not about to let the man who killed your father and destroyed my family take one more person from either of us." For the first time since she'd walked into that room, Elena didn't hesitate. "Then let's go," she said. "Now." They moved through the hallway fast, Marcus barking orders into his phone. More men appearing from every direction, the entire compound shifting from stillness to controlled chaos in the space of a heartbeat. Elena's mind raced through every face at the clinic tonight. The elderly man whose hand she'd bandaged, the volunteer, covering the front desk, the 3 patients waiting on the bench when she'd left. If Kessler's men were there, how many patients tonight? Adrian asked, reading her fear without her saying a word. I don't know. Maybe 6. Maybe more. They won't be touched, Adrian said. I promise you that. You can't promise that. I can, he said, and something in the flat certainty of his voice told her he meant it in a way that terrified her almost as much as it comforted her. Because I am done letting this man take things from people who never had a chance to fight back. The car doors slammed. Tires screamed against pavement, and as the city blurred past the windows, Elena realized she had walked into that meeting an hour ago as a stranger to this world, certain she would walk back out of it and never look back. She understood now that there was no walking back. Not from this, not from him, not from whatever waited for them at the clinic where the man who had destroyed both of their families in different ways, at different times, for reasons neither of them fully understood yet, was standing right now closer than either of them had ever imagined waiting. The tires screamed around the final corner, and Elena's hands were braced against the door before the car even fully stopped moving. Through the windshield, she could see men in dark jackets standing near the clinic entrance. 3 of them, maybe 4, and her stomach dropped straight through the floor of the car. Stay behind me, Adrian said, already reaching for the door handle. Those are my patients in there. I know. That's exactly why you're staying behind me. The car hadn't fully stopped when Adrian was already out moving fast, his men fanning out around him like they'd rehearsed this 100 times. Elena scrambled out after him, ignoring Marcus's hand trying to hold her back, ignoring every instinct screaming at her to run the other way. Elena! I'm not hiding while they're in there. The men at the entrance turned at the sound of footsteps, and for one terrible second, nobody moved. Elena recognized one of the faces, the elderly man's grandson, standing frozen just inside the doorway, his eyes wide with fear. He wasn't a threat. He was a bystander, caught in the middle of something he didn't understand, and the men blocking the door weren't looking at him at all. They were looking at her. Miss Carter, one of them said, almost pleasant, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. Mr. Kessler sends his regards. He wanted you to know he's aware of your new friends. Get away from my clinic. We're not here to hurt anyone. The man smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. Just delivering a message. Mr. Kessler finds it interesting that a woman who lost everything 8 years ago for refusing to keep his secrets is now cozying up to the one man in this city with the resources to actually threaten him. He wanted you to know he doesn't like surprises. Elena felt Adrian go rigid beside her, felt the temperature of the entire street seem to drop. You have 5 seconds to leave, Adrian said, voice flat, before this becomes a different conversation. Or what? The man said, still smiling. You'll do what you did to the Hendricks family. We heard about that. Very impressive. Very messy. 4 seconds. The man's smile finally faltered. He glanced at his companions, some silent calculation passing between them, and then without another word, they turned and walked back toward a car idling at the curb. No shots fired, no violence. Just a message delivered cold and precise, and Elena realized her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against her thighs to stop it. Is everyone inside okay? She called, rushing past Adrian toward the door. Elena, wait. She didn't wait. She pushed past the grandson, past 2 more patients huddled near the back wall, checking faces, counting heads, refusing to breathe normally until she'd confirmed every single person in that building was untouched. When she finally turned back around, Adrian was standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something between relief and fury, and something else entirely. They're fine, she said, breathless. Everyone's fine. This time. What does that mean? It means Kessler just proved he can walk up to your front door whenever he wants, surround the people you're trying to protect, and leave without anyone laying a hand on him, Adrian said, and his voice had an edge to it she hadn't heard before, something dangerously close to helplessness dressed up as anger. It means this isn't a warning anymore. It's a demonstration. A demonstration of what? That he can reach you, Adrian said. Anytime, anywhere. And there's nothing either of us can do to stop it unless we know exactly what he wants. The elderly man's grandson stepped forward, hands trembling. Miss Carter, who was that? What do they want with you? Elena opened her mouth, and nothing came out. She had no answer that wouldn't terrify a 19-year-old kid who'd only come here to get his grandfather's hand rebandaged. Adrian stepped in before she had to find one. Nobody you need to worry about, he said steady, commanding the kind of voice that made people believe him, even when they shouldn't. This clinic will have protection from now on. Nobody gets near this building without my men clearing them first. You can't just, Elena started. I can, Adrian said, turning to her. And I will. This isn't a discussion, Elena, not after what just happened. These are my patients, my clinic. You don't get to walk in and start making decisions about my life because a man I've never met decided to threaten me through his errand boys. You're right, Adrian said, quieter now, some of the hard edge softening. It's your clinic, your patients, your life. But it's my fault Kessler knows to come here at all, because the second I asked Marcus to bring you to me, I put a target on your back that wasn't there before. So, no, I don't get to control your choices. But I am not going to stand here and pretend I don't understand exactly what kind of man just stood in your doorway, or what he's capable of when someone doesn't give him what he wants. Elena stared at him, chest still heaving from adrenaline, and for the first time she saw past the composed, controlled mask he wore like armor. Underneath it was something raw guilt maybe, or fear, or both tangled together in a man who clearly wasn't used to feeling either. I need everyone to go home, Elena said finally, turning to the handful of remaining patients and volunteers, forcing steadiness into her voice she didn't fully feel. We're closing early tonight. I'm sorry. I'll explain more when I understand it myself. It took 20 minutes to clear the building. 20 minutes of Elena reassuring frightened patients, promising the clinic would reopen. Promising everyone was safe, all while Adrian's men quietly positioned themselves at every entrance, without a single patient noticing. By the time the last person left, Elena's legs finally gave out, and she sank onto the edge of an exam table, her whole body trembling with the release of adrenaline she'd been holding back for the better part of an hour. Adrian sat down across from her, close but not too close, giving her space she hadn't asked for, but clearly needed. You didn't have to stay, she said. Yes, I did. Why? Because you almost walked into a building full of armed men without a second thought, and I needed to know you were still breathing when it was over. Elena let out a shaky laugh that had no humor in it at all. I do that a lot, apparently. Walk into things without thinking. I noticed. It's how I lost my job, my reputation, everything I built for 6 years at that hospital. Her voice cracked slightly, and she hated herself for it, hated how exposed she suddenly felt, sitting in her own clinic with a man who 3 days ago had been a stranger and was now somehow tangled into the worst secret of her life. I walked into a room and saw a surgeon falsifying records to cover up a mistake that killed a patient, and instead of keeping my mouth shut like everyone told me to, I reported it. And it turned out that surgeon had friends powerful enough to make sure I never worked in this city again. Victor Kessler. Victor Kessler, she confirmed, and saying his name out loud in this context, connected now to her father's death to Adrian's family, made her stomach twist violently. I didn't know. All these years I thought I lost everything because I told the truth about a cover-up. I never imagined it was connected to my father. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Tell me about him. Your father. Why? Because if Kessler killed him and Kessler destroyed my family, then there's a reason those two things happened close enough together to matter. And I'd like to understand what that reason is before he decides to do something worse to either one of us. Elena studied him, weighing whether to trust a man she barely knew with the most painful chapter of her life. But something about the way he asked carefully, like he actually wanted to understand, rather than extract information, made the words come easier than she expected. My father worked security at a shipping company downtown. Nothing glamorous. He wasn't important, not in the way people like Kessler usually care about. But 2 weeks before he died, he told my mother he'd seen something at the warehouse he wasn't supposed to see. He wouldn't say what. He just kept saying he needed to report it to someone he trusted. Someone outside the company. Her hands twisted together in her lap. Then there was a fire. They said it was an electrical fault. He was the only one who died. I was 18. I believed it for 8 years. What was the shipping company? Meridian Logistics. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, subtle but unmistakable recognition, and beneath it something darker. What? Elena demanded. You know that name. Meridian Logistics was one of the companies my father used to move product before Kessler's people took it over 3 years ago. Adrian said slowly, like each word cost him something. It's how Kessler built half his current empire. He didn't just take my family's business. He absorbed it piece by piece, company by company, until there was nothing left that belonged to us. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her again, the same vertigo she'd felt back at Adrian's compound when Marcus first said Kessler's name. You're telling me my father saw something happening at a company that later became part of the empire that destroyed your family? I'm telling you, it's not a coincidence, Adrian said. Nothing about the last week has been a coincidence. Not the clinic, not Tommy getting shot 2 blocks from where you happen to be working, not any of it. You think Kessler orchestrated all of this? That he had one of his men shot on purpose just to get me in a room with you? I don't know, Adrian admitted, and the honesty of it, the willingness to say he didn't have every answer, struck her harder than any confident lie would have. But I intend to find out. And until I do, I need you somewhere I can protect you properly. Not here. Not alone. I'm not abandoning this clinic. I'm not asking you to abandon it. I'm asking you to let me put security here permanently, and I'm asking you to consider something else. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I run a foundation. Medical funding community outreach hospital partnerships across the city. It's legitimate, separate from everything else run by people who don't know the rest of what I do. I need someone to help manage it. Someone who actually cares about the people it's supposed to help instead of just moving numbers on a spreadsheet. Elena's eyes narrowed. You want to give me a job? I want to give you a reason to be close enough that I can keep you safe without it looking like protection. And yes, he added, before she could interrupt, I want your help because you clearly understand what these communities actually need better than anyone currently working for me. That sounds like a very convenient excuse to control my life. It's not control, it's an offer. You can say no. Something flickered across his face, quick and unguarded. I hope you don't, but you can. Elena stood up, pacing the small room, arms crossed tight against her chest. Everything about this felt like a trap dressed up in kindness, exactly the kind of arrangement that had cost her everything once before, when she trusted the wrong powerful man's intentions. And yet Adrian hadn't lied to her once. Not about Kessler, not about his family, not about the cold, uncomfortable truth of his own guilt. That counted for something, even if she hated how much it counted. I need time to think. Take it. And I want protection for this clinic regardless of what I decide about the job. The patients here didn't ask to be caught in the middle of whatever this is. Done. Already done, actually. My men aren't leaving this block tonight. Elena exhaled some of the tension in her shoulders, easing slightly, though the fear underneath it never fully left. Okay. Okay, you'll think about it, or okay, you're agreeing. Okay, I'll think about it, she said. Don't push your luck. For the first time since she'd met him, something that almost resembled a smile touched the corner of Adrian's mouth. It disappeared as quickly as it came, but Elena had seen it, and something about witnessing that small crack in his armor unsettled her more than anything Kessler's men had said at the door. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake replaying every detail her father's warning to her mother. The fire that took his life. The surgeon who destroyed her career. The mafia boss, now sitting at the center of both, connected by a man neither of them had ever met until 3 days ago, changed everything. By morning, exhaustion had worn down her resistance enough that when Marcus called to check on her, she surprised herself by asking him to set up a meeting to discuss the foundation position. "He'll be glad to hear that," Marcus said. "Don't read too much into it. I'm doing this because I need to understand what's happening, not because I trust any of you." "Understood, Miss Carter. For what it's worth, though." Marcus hesitated. "In 11 years, I've never seen him fight this hard to keep someone safe. Whatever this is, it's not nothing to him." Elena didn't have a response for that, so she said nothing at all. The compound felt different in daylight, less like a fortress, and more like a place people actually lived and worked, though. The tension in every hallway told a different story than the architecture did. Adrian met her in a smaller office this time, one lined with files and financial reports, instead of the imposing formality of the room where he'd confessed something raw and unguarded the night before. "You came back," he said. "I said I would. People say a lot of things they don't mean." "I'm not most people," Elena reminded him, echoing her own words from before, and something in his expression told her he remembered them too. "Tell me about the foundation, all of it. I want to know exactly what I'd be agreeing to before I say yes to anything." For the next hour, Adrian walked her through it. Hospital partnerships in underfunded neighborhoods, scholarship programs for nursing students who couldn't afford tuition, a network of community clinics, not unlike her own, that his foundation quietly kept afloat. Elena listened, asked sharp questions, caught two inconsistencies in the numbers that made Adrian pause and actually check his own records, impressed despite himself. "You're better at this than the people currently running it," he admitted. "That's not a high bar if what you just told me is accurate." "It's accurate. And it's exactly why I need someone who'll actually hold people accountable, instead of just signing off on whatever crosses their desk." Elena studied the numbers in front of her, something shifting in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something that might eventually become it. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I need full access, real authority. Not a title that looks good on paper while someone else makes the actual decisions. You'll have it. And I need to know that if I find something wrong, something illegal, something that crosses a line, you won't punish me for reporting it." Adrian went very still. "Is that what happened at the hospital?" "Yes." "I'm not Kessler." "You're a mafia boss," Elena said bluntly. "Forgive me if I need more than your word." Something in his jaw tightened, but he didn't argue the point. "Fair. Then here's my word anyway, for whatever it's worth to you right now. If you find corruption inside my foundation, you report it to me directly and I deal with it. No punishment for honesty. Ever. I've had enough people around me who only tell me what I want to hear. I don't need another one." Elena held his gaze for a long moment, searching for the lie she expected to find and not finding it. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll take the job." Something in Adrian's shoulders eased a tension she hadn't fully realized he was carrying until it released. "Good. Don't celebrate yet. I still don't trust you." "I wouldn't expect you to." Before either of them could say anything else, the door opened without a knock, and Marcus stepped in, his expression tighter than Elena had seen it yet. "Boss, we need to talk. Now." Adrian's entire demeanor shifted instantly, the brief warmth in the room evaporating. "What happened?" Marcus glanced at Elena, hesitating. "She stays," Adrian said. "Whatever this is, it involves her too. Say it." "We ran a full sweep of internal communications after last night," Marcus said carefully. "Standard procedure, whenever Kessler makes a move like that. And we found something. A pattern of outgoing calls over the last 6 weeks, routed through an encrypted line to a number we traced back to one of Kessler's known associates." The air in the room went cold. "Whose line?" Adrian asked, voice flat and dangerous. Marcus hesitated again, longer this time, like the answer physically pained him to say. "Daniel Whitfield." Elena watched Adrian's face change completely. Shock, then fury, then something colder and more controlled settling over both. Daniel's been with me for 9 years, Adrian said quietly. He's practically family. I know. Are you certain? I triple-checked before I came in here, Marcus said. I didn't want to believe it either, but the calls line up exactly with everything that's happened this week. Tommy getting shot near the clinic. Kessler's men knowing exactly where to find Elena, knowing enough about her background to weaponize it in that doorway last night. Someone's been feeding him information, boss. And all the evidence points to Daniel. Elena's mind raced backward through everything that had happened since that first night at the clinic. Every piece suddenly rearranging into a far more disturbing picture. If someone inside Adrian's organization had been feeding Kessler information for 6 weeks, that meant Kessler had known about Tommy's location before the shooting. It meant the entire chain of events that led her into this room, into this danger, might not have been coincidence or fate at all. It might have been engineered from the very beginning. You think Daniel arranged for Tommy to get shot near my clinic? Elena said slowly, testing the theory out loud, watching both men's faces for confirmation. You think this was never random? That Kessler wanted me connected to Adrian specifically and used one of his own people to make it happen? I don't know yet, Adrian said, though the tightness in his voice suggested he suspected the same thing. But I intend to find out exactly how deep this goes, and exactly what Daniel has told him. What are you going to do? Elena asked. Adrian's expression turned to something Elena hadn't seen from him yet. A coldness so complete it made her skin prickle, a reminder of exactly why the entire city feared this man before she'd ever known his name. I'm going to have a conversation with Daniel, he said. And then I'm going to find out exactly how far Kessler's reach extends into my own organization, because if he's been inside my walls for 6 weeks without me knowing, he could be planning something far worse than a warning at a clinic door. Adrian? Stay here, he said, already moving toward the door. Marcus with me. Wait. Elena stood, something in her refusing to be left behind again, refusing to be protected into helplessness. If this is about my father too, if Daniel's been feeding information that connects back to Meridian Logistics, to whatever my father saw 8 years ago, then I have a right to be part of this conversation. Adrian turned back, torn between the instinct to shield her and something else, something that recognized she wasn't the kind of woman who accepted being shielded. It could be dangerous. Everything since I met you has been dangerous, Elena said. I'd rather understand what's happening than sit in a room waiting to be told about it afterward. A long moment passed between them, some silent negotiation neither Marcus nor anyone else could see. Finally, Adrian nodded once, sharp and decisive. Stay close to me. Whatever happens in that room, you do not speak unless I tell you to. Understood? Understood. They found Daniel Whitfield in a small office 2 floors down, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and an easy smile that Elena immediately understood why Adrian had trusted him for 9 years. He looked up when they entered, and something in his expression flickered the instant he saw Marcus's face. Boss, he said carefully. What's going on? Sit down, Daniel. I am sitting down. Sit down. Adrian repeated, quiet and terrible, and Daniel's easy smile disappeared entirely. What is this about? Marcus stepped forward and set a folder on the desk, sliding it toward him without a word. Daniel opened it, and Elena watched the color drain from his face as he scanned the pages inside. That's not... Daniel started. I can explain that. Explain it then, Adrian said. It's not what it looks like. It looks like 6 weeks of encrypted calls to one of Kessler's known associates. Adrian said, voice deadly calm in a way that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. It looks like the man I trusted with my family's business for 9 years, selling information to the person responsible for destroying that family in the first place. Correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel. Tell me exactly what I'm getting wrong. Daniel's hands were shaking now, and Elena watched the last of his composure crumble entirely. He has my daughter, he said, voice breaking. Kessler has my daughter, Adrian. He's had her for 4 months. He said if I didn't feed him information, he'd... His voice cracked completely. I didn't have a choice. I swear to God I didn't have a choice. The room went utterly silent. Elena felt her own chest tighten with a horror that had nothing to do with betrayal, and everything to do with the impossible position Daniel had been forced into, the same kind of impossible position that had probably cost her father his life 8 years ago, for refusing to stay quiet about something he shouldn't have seen. "Why didn't you come to me?" Adrian's voice had changed completely, the coldness cracking into something closer to grief. "Daniel, 9 years. Why didn't you come to me the moment this happened?" "Because he told me if I did, she'd be dead within the hour." Daniel said, tears streaking down his face now, all pretense gone. "I know how this looks. I know what I've done. But I was trying to keep my daughter alive, and I didn't know what else to do." Adrian sat down slowly across from him, some of the fury draining out of his posture, replaced by something heavier. "What exactly have you told him?" "Everything," Daniel admitted. "Locations, schedules. I told him about the clinic before the shooting happened. I didn't know he was going to hurt anyone. I swear I didn't know that part." Elena felt sick. This confirmed everything Adrian had feared, that none of this had been coincidence, that Kessler had orchestrated the entire chain of events from the very beginning, using Daniel as an unwilling weapon to draw Elena and Adrian together for reasons still not fully understood. "Where is she being held?" Adrian asked. "Your daughter, do you know?" "No, he never told me. Just proof she's alive every few weeks. A photo, nothing more." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, and Elena watched something shift behind his eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a recalculation of everything he thought he understood about loyalty and betrayal. "We're going to get her back," Adrian said finally. "But you're going to help us do it the right way, starting now. You're going to tell Kessler exactly what he expects to hear, and you're going to let us guide what information actually reaches him from this point forward. If we do this carefully, he won't know we're on to him until it's too late for him to react. You'd help me. After everything I've done." "You didn't do this out of greed," Adrian said. "You did it because a monster threatened your child, and you chose her life over your loyalty to me. I understand that choice better than you know." His voice dropped, something old and painful moving behind his words. "I might have made the same one once if I'd had the chance." Elena watched the exchange, something in her chest aching at the raw grief underneath Adrian's controlled exterior, understanding for the first time just how much this man had actually lost 3 years ago. How much of his silence had been built on wounds nobody had ever let him properly grieve. Marcus cleared his throat carefully. "Boss, if Kessler's been getting real-time information for 6 weeks, we need to assume he knows considerably more than we'd like about our operations. This changes everything about how we move forward." "I know. It also means," Marcus continued, glancing at Elena, "that he likely knows about the Foundation position before Miss Carter has even officially started. If he sees that as an escalation, then we make sure he sees it as something he can't touch," Adrian said, standing, some of his composure returning even as the weight of everything they'd just learned settled over the room. "From this point forward, nothing moves without going through me directly. No exceptions. Daniel, you'll work with Marcus on exactly what gets fed back to Kessler's people. We use this to our advantage instead of letting it destroy us." "And my daughter. We find her," Adrian said, and there was something in his voice, something absolute and unshakable that made even Elena believe him completely. "I promise you that." As the meeting broke apart, Elena found herself standing beside Adrian in the hallway. Both of them quiet. Both of them carrying the weight of everything they'd just learned. The scope of what they were facing had expanded in the space of an hour from a single dangerous man's warning into something far larger. A captured child, 6 weeks of betrayal born from desperation rather than malice, and a killer with reach extending into the very heart of Adrian's organization. "This is bigger than either of us realized," Elena said quietly. "Yes. Do you regret bringing me into this?" Adrian turned to look at her, and for a moment the careful control slipped again, revealing something underneath that Elena was beginning to recognize as genuinely, achingly human. "No," he said. "I regret that you were already in it before I ever met you, and neither of us knew it. I regret that Kessler's been circling both our lives for years, using people we trusted to hurt us in ways we never saw coming. But I don't regret finding you, Elena. Whatever else this turns into, I don't regret that. Elena didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't sure she wanted one yet, not with everything still churning inside her. Not with her father's death now tangled inextricably into a war she hadn't known she was part of until 4 days ago. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down expecting a message from the clinic, and instead found a text from an unknown number, 3 words that made her blood run cold. I remember you, Elena. Adrian's voice sharpened instantly, reading the change in her face. What is it? She turned the phone toward him without a word, watching his expression harden into something dangerous the moment he read it. Kessler, he said, not a question. How would he even have this number? The same way he's had access to everything else for the last 6 weeks. Adrian said grimly, already reaching for his own phone, already calling for Marcus, his voice dropping into the commanding tone that made the entire compound move around him like a single organism responding to a threat. This ends now. I want every line traced, every device swept, and I want to know exactly what Kessler thinks he remembers about you, because whatever it is, Elena... He turned back to her jaw, tight eyes, dark with something fierce and protective. It's the reason he's been circling you long before either of us knew each other existed. Elena stared down at her phone. Those 3 words burning into her mind, and for the first time since this entire nightmare began 4 days ago, she understood with absolute certainty that none of this, not the clinic, not Tommy, not Adrian's sudden fixation on a stranger who saved a man's life, had ever been random at all. Somewhere out there, Victor Kessler had been waiting for her for a very long time. And he had just made sure she knew it. Marcus arrived within minutes, and the calm efficiency that usually defined him had been replaced by something sharper, more urgent. He took one look at the phone in Elena's hand, read the message, and immediately started barking instructions into his own device without waiting for Adrian's order. I want a full trace on that number in the next 10 minutes. I don't care what it takes. It won't work, Adrian said quietly. If Kessler wanted to be traced, he wouldn't have sent it. Then what was the point of sending it at all? Elena asked, her voice tighter than she intended. If he's smart enough to stay hidden, why announce himself? Adrian's jaw tightened. Because he wants you afraid. Fear makes people careless. It makes them run to the people they think can protect them, and it makes those people easier to track. He looked at her directly. He's not trying to reach you, Elena. He's trying to reach me through you. The words settled over her like a weight she hadn't asked to carry. So this is still about you, even now. It's about both of us, Adrian said. But you're the easier target. That's what worries me. Marcus's phone buzzed, and his expression darkened as he read whatever had come through. Boss, we've got a location on Daniel's daughter. The room went silent. Where? Adrian asked, already moving. An old textile warehouse on the east side. One of our informants inside Kessler's outer network flagged unusual activity there over the last month. Increased security food deliveries for someone who isn't supposed to exist on paper. Marcus hesitated. It's not confirmed, but it's the strongest lead we've had. Then we move on it. Boss, if this is a setup, I know what it could be, Adrian said, cutting him off. But if there's even a chance that girl is in that building, we don't have the luxury of caution. Every day Kessler holds her is another day. Daniel has no choice but to keep feeding him information, and every day that continues, Elena stays in danger. This ends now. Elena felt her pulse spike. I'm coming with you. No. Adrian's voice left no room for argument. Absolutely not. Adrian, this isn't a clinic where the worst thing that happens is somebody threatens you through a doorway, Adrian said, turning to face her, fully something fierce and protective burning behind his eyes. This is a warehouse that might be full of armed men guarding a kidnapped teenager. If Kessler is watching, and I have to assume he is, the last thing I am doing is walking you directly into his crosshairs. So instead you want me sitting somewhere safe while you walk into a possible trap. Yes, that's not fair. I don't care if it's fair, Adrian said, and something raw slipped through the words more honest than she expected. I care if you're alive at the end of tonight. Those are the only terms I'm willing to negotiate. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to remind him she'd survived worse without his protection, but the fear underneath his anger was too plain to ignore, too real to dismiss as simple control. She recognized it because she'd felt it herself only moments ago, reading 3 words on a stranger's phone that had turned her blood to ice. Fine, she said finally. But I'm not sitting somewhere doing nothing. Let me help Daniel figure out what to tell Kessler. If I can't be useful in the field, I can be useful here. Adrian studied her for a long moment, some of the tension in his shoulders easing slightly at her concession. That I can agree to. The next 2 hours felt like the longest of Elena's life. She sat across from Daniel in a small, secured room, helping him craft careful, believable responses to feed back through the compromised line every word chosen to protect his daughter without revealing that his betrayal had been discovered. Daniel's hands shook the entire time, guilt and terror fighting for control of his expression. What if this doesn't work? He asked quietly. What if Kessler figures out we're onto him before Adrian gets to that warehouse? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Elena said, though her own stomach twisted with the same fear. Right now, we focus on giving him exactly what he expects. Nothing more. You're good at this, Daniel said, watching her review the message drafts with a critical eye. Calm under pressure. I can see why he trusts you already. He doesn't trust me. Not really. He brought you into a room where he confessed his men had a mole feeding information to the man who destroyed his family, Daniel said. In 9 years, I've never seen Adrian Valenti let an outsider witness something that vulnerable. Trust me, Miss Carter. Whatever you think this is, it's more than you realize. Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed again. Her whole body went rigid, certain it would be another message from the unknown number. Another 3 cruel words designed to unravel what little composure she had left. Instead, it was Marcus. We're approaching the warehouse. Stay by your phone. Elena's fingers tightened around the device, every second stretching unbearably as she waited for updates that didn't come fast enough. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Daniel had gone quiet beside her, both of them, locked in the same silent vigil, praying for news that wouldn't be catastrophic. When the phone finally buzzed again, Elena nearly dropped it in her rush to answer. Tell me, she said before Marcus could even speak. We found her. Marcus's voice was rough with exhaustion and relief. She's alive. Scared, malnourished, but alive. We're moving her to a secure location now. Elena felt tears sting her eyes, relief crashing through her so hard her hands started shaking again, this time for an entirely different reason. And Adrian? A pause. Too long. Elena's stomach dropped instantly. Marcus, where's Adrian? There were more men guarding the building than we anticipated, Marcus said carefully. It got complicated. He's handling it. What does that mean, Marcus? Tell me what's happening. It means I need to go, Marcus said, and the line went dead before Elena could ask another question. Daniel's face had gone pale beside her. That didn't sound good. No, Elena said, standing so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. It didn't. The next 40 minutes were an agony of silence. Elena paced the small room until Daniel finally suggested gently that they move to the main security office, where at least she could see the live feed of communications coming through Marcus's team. She agreed instantly, desperate for anything that felt like control over a situation that had none. The office buzzed with activity when they arrived, men monitoring screens, voices overlapping in clipped, urgent updates. Elena scanned every face, searching for any sign of Adrian, finding none. Report, she said, surprising herself with the authority in her own voice. One of the men glanced at her, hesitating clearly, unused to taking direction from someone outside the chain of command. But something about her expression must have convinced him this wasn't the moment to question her. Extraction of the girl was successful, clean. No injuries on our side during that part of the operation." He hesitated. "But there was a secondary team stationed at the warehouse we didn't account for. Kessler's men better armed than we expected. Mr. Valenti stayed behind to cover the extraction team's exit." Stayed behind meaning what exactly? Meaning he's still inside that building. Elena's heart stopped. "Alone. With two of our men. But—" The man hesitated again, clearly uncomfortable delivering this information to her specifically. "We lost radio contact 8 minutes ago." The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. 8 minutes. In a building full of armed men who worked for a killer who had just proven he was willing to murder anyone standing between him and what he wanted. "Get him back," Elena said, voice shaking now despite every effort to control it. "Whatever it takes, get him out of there." "Miss Carter, that's not your call to—" "I don't care whose call it is." She snapped, something fierce and desperate rising in her chest that she didn't have time to examine right now. "Send everyone. Send everything you have. If something happens to him because this team hesitated—" The radio on the desk crackled to life, cutting her off entirely. Static then, a voice breathless and strained. "This is Reyes. We've got eyes on the boss. He's alive. Repeat, he's alive, but he's hit." Elena's knees nearly buckled. "Hit how badly?" Nobody answered her directly. The room erupted into motion instead. Men grabbing equipment, voices overlapping with coordinates and instructions. And Elena stood frozen in the middle of it all, terror clawing up her throat as she waited for someone, anyone, to tell her whether the man who had upended her entire life 4 days ago was going to survive the night. The ambulance, one of Adrian's private medical vehicles rather than a city ambulance, Elena would learn later, arrived at the compound 23 minutes after the radio call. Elena was already at the entrance when the doors opened, and the sight that greeted her stopped her heart entirely. Adrian was conscious, which she registered as a small, desperate mercy, but his shirt was soaked through with blood on his left side, his face pale in a way that made him look nothing like the controlled, commanding man she'd come to know over the last 4 days. "Elena," he started. "Don't talk," she said immediately, professional instinct overriding every ounce of fear flooding through her. She was at his side before the medical team could stop her hands already assessing the wound with the same clinical focus she'd used on Tommy days earlier. "Gunshot. Grazed," Adrian said through gritted teeth. "It's not as bad as it looks. It's exactly as bad as it looks. Don't lie to me right now." The medical team moved him inside quickly, and Elena followed without asking permission, some instinct refusing to let him out of her sight after everything that had just happened. She stayed beside him through the examination, holding his hand without quite realizing she'd reached for it, watching the doctor's careful work with the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly how close a bullet wound could come to being fatal. "You're lucky," the doctor said, finally closing the wound with careful stitches. "Another inch to the right and this conversation wouldn't be happening." "I've heard that before," Adrian said, some of his usual dry composure returning now that the adrenaline was fading. "When?" Elena asked. 3 years ago." He met her eyes, and something passed between them, heavy and unspoken. "The night everything I loved was taken from me." Elena didn't push further, understanding instinctively that this wasn't the moment for that story. Not with him still pale and shaking slightly from blood loss. Not with the memory of tonight's violence still fresh enough to be raw. Instead, she simply held his hand tighter, and if he noticed the gesture, he didn't comment on it. "The girl," Adrian said instead, voice rough. "Daniel's daughter. Is she safe?" Elena confirmed. "Marcus said she's being examined now, malnourished, frightened but alive." Something in Adrian's face eased at that genuine relief, cutting through the pain and exhaustion. "Good, that's good. You almost died getting her out. I'd do it again." "That's not the reassurance you think it is." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, quickly swallowed by a wince, as the doctor finished the last stitch. "I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm telling you the truth. Some things are worth the risk, Elena. That girl being alive tonight, instead of dead in a warehouse because her father made an impossible choice to protect her, that's worth it. Elena didn't have a response for that, not one that wouldn't reveal more than she was ready to admit. So she simply stayed beside him, hands still wrapped around his, until the doctor finally cleared the room and left them alone with the quiet aftermath of everything that had happened. Elena. Adrian's voice was quieter now, stripped of its usual command. I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, not dismiss it because of the circumstances. Okay. 3 years ago, my wife and my younger brother were killed in what everyone believed was a rival family's retaliation for a deal gone wrong. His voice remained steady, but Elena felt his hand tighten around hers. I spent 2 years hunting down every person I believed responsible. I killed men, Elena. I destroyed families the way mine had been destroyed, believing it would fix something inside me that had shattered beyond repair. It didn't. Nothing did. I just became emptier with every act of vengeance until I stopped feeling anything at all. That's the silence people talk about when they whisper about me in this city. It wasn't grief. It was the absence of everything, because I'd traded every piece of my humanity for revenge that never actually satisfied anything. Adrian, you don't have to. I need to say this, he said, gentler now but insistent. Because tonight, watching that girl walk out of that warehouse alive, watching Daniel's face when he finally saw her again, I felt something I haven't felt in 3 years. Not the emptiness I've been living with. Something closer to purpose. And I think it started the moment I watched you save a stranger's life without asking for anything in return. His eyes met hers, raw and unguarded, in a way she hadn't seen from him before. I don't fully understand what you've done to me in 4 days, Elena Carter. But I know I don't want it to stop. The room felt suddenly too small, too charged with everything neither of them had said aloud until this moment. Elena's chest ached with the weight of it, the danger, the loss, the strange, impossible connection that had grown between them faster than any of it should have made sense. I should let you rest, she said finally, though she made no move to release his hand. You could stay. Adrian, I'm not asking for anything. You're not ready to give, he said quickly. I'm asking you not to leave me alone in this room with everything I just admitted hanging in the air between us. Something in his voice, some quiet vulnerability so different from the controlled, dangerous man the entire city feared, made the decision for her before she'd fully consciously made it. She settled into the chair beside his bed, still holding his hand, and stayed until his breathing evened out into exhausted sleep. Marcus found her there an hour later, standing quietly in the doorway before finally stepping inside. How is he? Resting. The doctor says he'll be fine given time. He always is, Marcus said, though something in his voice suggested this wasn't entirely true, that Adrian had come closer to death more times than the man himself would ever admit. Miss Carter, there's something else you should know. Something we found on one of Kessler's men during the extraction. Elena's stomach tightened at his tone. What kind of something? Marcus hesitated, glancing at Adrian's sleeping form before gesturing for Elena to follow him into the hallway, clearly unwilling to discuss whatever this was within earshot. Once the door closed behind them, he pulled a folded document from his jacket, handing it over without a word. Elena unfolded it, and her breath caught immediately. It was a photograph, old, slightly worn at the edges, of her father, standing beside 2 other men she didn't recognize in front of a warehouse she recognized instantly as belonging to Meridian Logistics. Where did you get this? One of the men we captured tonight was carrying a file. It looks like Kessler's been keeping records on your father for years, long before the fire that killed him. Marcus's expression was grim. Elena, there's something written on the back. I think you need to read it yourself. Elena flipped the photograph over with trembling hands, and the words scrawled there in faded ink made her whole body go cold. Robert Carter Witness. Handle before he talks. VK. He knew, Elena whispered. Kessler knew my father was going to expose something, and he had him killed to keep him quiet. It looks that way, Marcus said carefully. Elena, there's more. The file also contained records suggesting your father wasn't working alone. He'd been documenting something for months before he died. Shipments, dates, names. We believe he was building a case against Kessler's operation, likely to hand over to law enforcement or a journalist he trusted. Do you know what happened to that documentation? No. If it existed, and if Kessler found it before your father died, it's long gone. But if your father hid it somewhere, Kessler never found, then it might still exist. Elena finished, her mind racing through possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider in 8 long years of believing her father's death had been a senseless accident. Marcus, I need to see everything in that file. Everything you have. Elena, I don't think... This is my father, she said, voice sharp with a fierceness that surprised even herself. My father Marcus. I have spent 8 years believing his death was random tragedy. And now I'm learning it was murder orchestrated by the same man circling both my life and Adrian's for years. I have every right to see what you found. Marcus studied her for a long moment, some internal calculation passing behind his eyes, before finally nodding. I'll pull everything together. But Elena... He paused at the door, expression heavy with something like warning. Whatever's in that file, it's going to change how you see the last 8 years of your life. Are you prepared for that? Elena thought of her mother, who had died 3 years after her father still believing the official story. Never knowing the truth had been stolen from her, right alongside her husband. She thought of every night she'd spent wondering if there was more to the story than a faulty electrical panel. Every instinct she'd suppressed because grief made it easier to accept convenient lies than chase painful truths. I've been prepared for this for 8 years, she said. I just didn't know it yet. The file Marcus brought her an hour later contained more than Elena had braced herself for. Photographs, shipping manifests, with irregularities highlighted in her father's careful handwriting, dates that lined up with disappearances, and unexplained deaths spanning nearly 2 years before his own murder. Her father hadn't just witnessed one crime. He had been quietly, methodically building a case against an entire criminal network, gathering evidence that could have exposed Victor Kessler's operation to the world. And then he'd been silenced before he ever got the chance. Elena sat alone in a small office long after midnight, sorting through pages that painted a picture of her father she'd never known. Not just a security guard who happened upon something he shouldn't have seen, but a man who had chosen deliberately and dangerously to fight back against corruption he witnessed, even knowing the risk it carried. He was brave, she whispered to the empty room. He was so much braver than anyone ever told me. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to find Adrian standing in the doorway, pale, still moving carefully to favor his injured side, but upright and alert despite the doctor's orders for rest. You should be in bed, she said immediately. I heard what Marcus found. He moved slowly into the room, settling into the chair across from her, with a wince he tried and failed to hide. I wanted to see you, and I wanted to see this myself. Elena slid the file toward him, watching his expression as he scanned the pages, watching something harden in his eyes as the full scope of Kessler's crimes became clear. He was trying to expose an entire trafficking network, Adrian said quietly, studying one particular page longer than the others. Elena, this isn't just about shipping irregularities. Your father found evidence connecting Kessler to human trafficking routes running through Meridian's warehouses. If this had reached the authorities, it would have destroyed him, Elena finished. That's why he killed my father before it ever could, and it's connected to what happened to my family. Adrian said slowly, pieces visibly clicking into place behind his eyes. My father discovered something similar 3 years ago. He confronted Kessler directly about irregularities he'd found in shared shipping contracts. 2 weeks later, my wife and brother were dead, and my father was too broken by grief to ever fight back the way he should have. So Kessler's been doing this for years, Elena said, horror creeping through her voice. Silencing anyone who gets close to exposing him. My father, your family, whoever else stood in his way before either of us. And now he's watching both of us, Adrian said grimly. Because we're the two people in this city with the strongest personal motivation to finish what our family started. Elena felt something shift inside her grief, transforming slowly into something harder, more resolute. Then we finish it. Adrian looked up sharply. Elena, no, she said, cutting him off with a firmness that surprised them both. I have spent 8 years grieving a father I thought died in an accident, never knowing he died because a monster silenced him to protect a trafficking operation. I am not going to sit quietly now that I know the truth. Whatever evidence he was building, whatever case he was trying to make, I want to finish it. For him, for everyone Kessler has hurt since. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people killed. Then I'll take that risk, Elena said. The same way my father did, the same way you have apparently for 3 years. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression that mixed frustration, fear, and something that looked dangerously close to pride. You're not going to let me talk you out of this, are you? No. Then we do it together, he said finally, decision settling into his voice like iron. Not you alone. Not me running ahead while you wait somewhere safe. Together or not at all. Elena felt something warm bloom in her chest, despite the darkness of everything they were discussing. A recognition that this man, dangerous and complicated as he was, actually meant what he said. Together, she agreed. Their moment was interrupted by Marcus appearing in the doorway once more, his expression grave in a way that immediately put both of them on alert. What now? Adrian asked, already bracing for more bad news. We just intercepted a message meant for Kessler, Marcus said. From inside our own walls. Someone else has been talking to him, someone we haven't identified yet. The room went cold. Another mole, Adrian said flatly. It looks that way. And boss? Marcus hesitated, glancing at Elena with an expression she didn't like at all. The message specifically references tonight's operation. Whoever sent it knew about the warehouse extraction before it happened. They knew you'd be there personally. Elena's stomach dropped. You're saying someone set you up to get shot tonight? I'm saying, Marcus said grimly, that whoever this second informant is, they have access to information at the highest level of this organization. Which means neither of you is safe inside these walls until we find them. Adrian's expression turned to stone, all traces of the vulnerable man from moments earlier disappearing, entirely replaced by the cold, calculating leader who had built and defended an empire through sheer force of will. Then we find them, he said. Tonight, before Kessler gets another chance to use them against either of us. Elena watched the transformation with a strange mix of unease and understanding, recognizing that the tenderness she'd witnessed moments ago and the ruthless determination now hardening his features were not contradictions, but two sides of the same man. A man capable of devastating violence in defense of the very few things he still allowed himself to care about. She was beginning to understand with a clarity that both terrified and steadied her that she had become one of those things. And somewhere out there, Victor Kessler was still watching, still waiting, still pulling strings. Neither of them could fully see yet. Strings that connected her father's murder to Adrian's shattered family, to a traitor still hiding inside the very walls meant to protect them, to a war that had been building silently for years, before either of them ever knew the other existed. The message on Elena's phone flashed once more in her memory. 3 cold words that no longer felt like a threat from a stranger. They felt like the opening move of a man who had been planning this for far longer than either of them yet understood. The war room, as Marcus had started calling it, filled quickly. Adrian stood at the center, despite the doctor's protests still echoing somewhere down the hallway, refusing to sit, while his organization scrambled to identify a second traitor hiding inside walls he'd trusted for years. I want every person with access to tonight's operational details in this building within the hour, Adrian said. No exceptions. If they're not here, I want to know exactly why. That's going to raise suspicion, Marcus warned. If our mole realizes we're closing in, they might run. Or worse, they might warn Kessler we're on to him. Then we do it quietly, Adrian said. One conversation at a time, starting with the people who had access to the extraction timeline specifically. Elena stood off to the side watching him work, seeing for the first time the machinery behind the man, not just cold calculation, but genuine strategic precision, born from years of surviving a world that offered no mercy for hesitation. It should have frightened her more than it did. "How many people knew the timeline?" she asked. 12, Marcus said. "Not counting Daniel, who we've already accounted for." "Then we start with those 12, Adrian said. "Quietly, individually. I want to know where each of them was in the 6 hours before that operation, and I want to know it by morning." The next several hours blurred into a controlled, methodical hunt. Elena found herself pulled into it, despite Adrian's initial instinct to shield her from the darker workings of his world, mostly because her sharp attention to detail proved impossible to ignore. She noticed inconsistencies in alibis that trained security men missed, caught a nervous tell in one man's story, that made Adrian's eyes narrow with sudden focus. "You're good at reading people," Adrian said quietly, watching her from across the room as the 12th interview wrapped up without producing a clear suspect. 6 years in emergency medicine teaches you to spot a lie fast. People lie about pain, about how an injury happened, about what they took, and how much. She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion finally catching up with her after a night with no sleep at all. None of tonight matched, though. Every alibi checked out. "Then the leak isn't one of the 12, Adrian said, frustration edging into his voice. "Which means someone outside that list still had access somehow. Or someone lied well enough that even I couldn't catch it." Marcus reappeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable in a way that immediately put both of them on edge. "Boss, we might have something. It's not from the interviews." "What is it?" "Financial records. I had someone run a deep audit on every account connected to senior staff over the last 6 months, cross-referenced against unexplained deposits." He hesitated, glancing at Elena before continuing. "We found something. A payment 3 weeks ago, routed through 4 shell accounts before landing somewhere we couldn't immediately trace. But we finally cracked the last layer 20 minutes ago." "Whose account?" Adrian asked, voice going dangerously flat. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Vincent Ross." The name landed like a physical blow. Elena watched Adrian's entire body go rigid, watched something shatter behind his eyes before the mask of control slammed back into place. "That's not possible," Adrian said, though his voice lacked the certainty of the words. "Vincent has been with this family since before I took over. He served my father for 15 years. "I know," Marcus said quietly. "I checked 3 times before I brought this to you." Elena watched the 2 men, sensing the depth of betrayal this represented, understanding instinctively that this wound cut far deeper than Daniel's forced compliance had. This wasn't a father protecting his kidnapped daughter. This was someone choosing greed, choosing Kessler's money over decades of loyalty. "Where is he right now?" Adrian asked, voice dropping to something cold and lethal. "In the building. He doesn't know we've found the payment. Bring him to me." "Adrian." Elena started, some instinct warning her that whatever came next would test something fundamental in the man she was still learning to understand. "Not now, Elena." His voice wasn't unkind, but it left no room for argument. "This is something I have to handle myself." She didn't push. She recognized, watching the transformation overtake him completely, that this was a version of Adrian Valenti she hadn't fully witnessed yet. Not the wounded, honest man who'd confessed his grief to her hours earlier, but the ruthless architect of an empire built on discipline and consequence. Vincent Ross was brought in 15 minutes later, an older man with silver hair and the kind of composed dignity that made his betrayal feel even more staggering. He didn't try to deny it when Adrian slid the financial records across the table. He simply stared at them, something like relief passing briefly across his weathered face, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for weeks. "How long?" Adrian asked. 4 months. "Why?" Vincent's hands trembled slightly as he folded them together on the table. "Because I'm dying, Adrian. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave me 6 months 8 weeks ago." His voice cracked, decades of stoic loyalty crumbling into something raw and human. My daughter has 3 children and a husband who lost his job last year. I have nothing to leave them. Nothing except decades of service to a family that pays well but doesn't leave room for saving anything beyond what keeps this life running. Kessler offered enough money to secure their future for the next 20 years. I told myself it was a fair trade. My remaining months for their whole lives. The room fell into a heavy silence. Elena felt her chest tighten watching Adrian process this watching fury war visibly with something closer to grief. You could have come to me, Adrian said finally, voice rough. I would have helped your family, you know that. I know, Vincent said. But pride is a strange thing at the end of a life, Adrian. I didn't want charity. I wanted to provide for them myself one last time, even if it meant betraying everything I believed in to do it. What did you tell him, Kessler? What information did you give him? Everything about tonight's extraction. Locations, timing, security details. Vincent's eyes lifted, meeting Adrian's directly. I didn't know he'd have men waiting to shoot you. I swear that on whatever time I have left. I thought I was just selling information about a rescue operation. I didn't know he intended to kill you in the process. Elena watched Adrian absorb this, watched the war inside him play out across features he usually kept perfectly controlled. This wasn't Daniel's story of coerced desperation. This was calculated betrayal, however sympathetically motivated, and it had nearly cost Adrian his life just hours earlier. I should kill you for this, Adrian said quietly. You understand that. I do, but I'm not going to. Vincent's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting mercy. You're going to help me instead. Adrian continued, voice hardening into something strategic and controlled. You're going to feed Kessler exactly what I tell you to feed him from this point forward. And when this is over, when Kessler is no longer a threat to anyone in this city, your family will be provided for. Not because you earned it through betrayal, but because 15 years of loyalty before this moment still means something to me even now. Adrian, I don't deserve. I know what you deserve, Adrian said flatly. I also know what dying men do when they're desperate to protect the people they love. I understand that better than you might think. His eyes flicked briefly to Elena, something unspoken passing between them. You have one chance to make this right. Don't waste it. Vincent nodded. Tears finally breaking free down weathered cheeks, and Marcus led him out to begin coordinating the same careful disinformation strategy they'd built with Daniel hours earlier. The moment the door closed, Adrian's composure finally cracked. He sank into the nearest chair, exhaustion and pain and grief all crashing over him at once, and Elena moved without thinking, kneeling beside him, taking his hand the way she had in the medical room hours earlier. You didn't have to show him mercy, she said quietly. I know. Why did you? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring at their joined hands like he was trying to understand something about himself he'd forgotten existed. Because 3 years ago, I would have killed him without a second thought, he said finally. I would have told myself it was justice that loyalty demanded blood for betrayal, and I would have felt nothing afterward, the same nothing I've felt about everything for 3 years. His eyes met hers raw and searching. But sitting there listening to him talk about his daughter, about wanting to leave something behind for the people he loves before he dies. I understood him, Elena. I understood exactly what desperation does to good people, and I couldn't be the monster this city already believes I am. Not this time. Elena felt something shift deep inside her chest, watching this dangerous, complicated man wrestle openly with his own capacity for both violence and grace. That's not weakness, she said softly. Whatever anyone tells you, that's not weakness at all. It doesn't feel like strength either. Maybe it's neither, Elena said. Maybe it's just being human, which is something you told me you'd forgotten how to be. Something in his expression shifted, softened, and for a moment, the weight of the entire night seemed to lift slightly between them. You keep doing that, he said quietly. Doing what? Making me feel like the parts of myself I thought were gone forever might still exist somewhere. Before Elena could respond, urgent footsteps sounded down the hallway, and Marcus reappeared, breathless and pale, in a way that instantly shattered the fragile moment between them. "Boss, we have a problem, a big one." Adrian was on his feet instantly, despite his injury. "What now?" "Kessler's making a move, a public one." Marcus held out his phone hand, shaking slightly. "He's holding a press conference in 2 hours, announcing a major philanthropic initiative, positioning himself as a legitimate businessman investing in the city's underserved communities." "That's insane," Elena said. "He's a murderer. He's a murderer with expensive lawyers and enough political connections to make that irrelevant," Marcus said grimly. "And there's more. Sources say he's planning to specifically name Adrian during the conference, publicly accuse him of running a criminal empire that's been terrorizing legitimate businesses across the city. He's trying to flip the narrative before we can expose anything he's done." Adrian's expression turned to stone. "He's trying to make himself the victim and me the villain in public before we can move against him with any of the evidence we've gathered." "Exactly. Then we stop him." "How?" Marcus asked. "We can't storm a press conference filled with reporters and city officials. That would confirm every accusation he's about to make." Elena's mind raced, connecting pieces that suddenly felt urgently important. "My father's evidence," she said. "The documentation about the trafficking routes, the shipping irregularities. If we can verify enough of it fast enough, we could get it into the hands of a journalist before Kessler even opens his mouth. Beat him to the narrative instead of reacting to it." Adrian turned to her sharply. "That evidence is 8 years old. It would need corroboration to hold up publicly. Verified sources' current documentation showing the pattern still exists." "Then we find that corroboration," Elena said. "Fast. Adrian, my father, spent months building that case. If we can find even a fraction of proof that Kessler's operation is still running the same routes, still committing the same crimes, it could destroy him publicly before he ever gets the chance to destroy us." Adrian finished something sharp and determined, lighting behind his eyes. "Marcus, I need everything we have on Kessler's current shipping operations cross-referenced against the routes documented in Robert Carter's files. Now. We have 2 hours." The next 90 minutes moved at a pace that left Elena breathless adrenaline and desperate hope driving every second forward. She worked alongside analysts pouring through shipping manifests cross-referencing dates and locations with the careful documentation her father had assembled 8 years earlier. The patterns emerged faster than she expected. Routes that hadn't changed in nearly a decade, warehouses still operating under different corporate names, but connected through the same underlying ownership structures. "Here," she said, pointing at a manifest that made her stomach turn. "This warehouse. Same location my father flagged in his notes, just renamed twice since then. Current shipping records show unusual patterns matching exactly what he documented. Irregular cargo weights, shipments arriving with no corresponding sales records, activity concentrated during late-night hours." Marcus leaned over her shoulder, studying the data with growing intensity. "This is it. This is enough to show a documented pattern spanning 8 years still active today. It's not proof of trafficking specifically." Elena said, some clinical part of her mind still cataloging weaknesses even as excitement built in her chest. "But it's proof of a pattern serious enough to warrant investigation. Enough to make any journalist worth their credibility ask hard questions before accepting whatever narrative Kessler tries to sell in that press conference." "It's enough," Adrian said, appearing beside them, his expression sharp with renewed purpose. "Marcus, get this to Sarah Chen at the Tribune. She's covered organized crime in this city for 15 years, and she's never taken a bribe to look the other way. If anyone can move fast enough to get ahead of Kessler's narrative, it's her. On it." As Marcus rushed off to make the call, Adrian turned to Elena, something warm and grateful settling over his exhausted features. "You just might have saved both of us tonight." "We're not done yet," Elena said, though something in her chest lightened slightly at the acknowledgement. "Kessler's conference is still happening. Even if this reaches a journalist in time, it doesn't guarantee the story breaks before he speaks." "No," Adrian agreed. But it means whatever he says today, there will be someone credible enough asking the right questions immediately afterward. He won't get to walk away clean. They didn't have to wait long to find out. 90 minutes later, gathered around a screen in the war room with the entire senior staff present, they watched Kessler's press conference unfold in real time. He stood confidently at a podium, expensive suit practiced smile exactly the picture of legitimate success he'd clearly spent years cultivating as camouflage. For too long, Kessler said smoothly. This city has allowed organized criminal elements to operate under the guise of legitimate business, terrorizing honest entrepreneurs who simply want to build something positive for their communities. Elena's hands curled into fists, watching him speak, the audacity of it burning through her like acid. I am proud to announce today the launch of the Kessler Community Trust, he continued, dedicated to rebuilding neighborhoods that have suffered under the shadow of men like Adrian Valenti, whose organization has... The room erupted in tense murmurs as Kessler continued his carefully constructed accusations, painting Adrian as a violent criminal, preying on the vulnerable, while positioning himself as the benevolent solution. Elena watched Adrian's face throughout, watching him absorb every calculated lie, with a stillness that betrayed nothing except the white-knuckled grip of his hand against the edge of the table. Then, just as Kessler opened the floor for questions, a woman stepped forward from the assembled press, and Elena recognized the name displayed on her press badge immediately. Sarah Chen. Mr. Kessler. Sarah said, her voice cutting cleanly through the room. Before we discuss your new philanthropic initiative, I'd like to ask about documented shipping irregularities at 3 warehouses connected to Meridian logistics patterns that appear to have remained consistent for nearly a decade, dating back to before your acquisition of the company. Kessler's practiced smile flickered just barely, but Elena caught it, and judging by the tension rippling through the war room, so did everyone else watching. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Kessler said smoothly, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I'm referring to evidence suggesting these warehouses have been used for trafficking operations spanning at least 8 years. Sarah continued, unflinching. Evidence that appears to connect directly to the unsolved 2018 death of a security guard named Robert Carter, who was documenting these exact irregularities before he died in what was officially ruled an accidental fire. The room exploded into a cacophony of shouted questions from other reporters, cameras flashing rapid fire, and Kessler's composure finally cracked entirely, his face contorting with barely controlled fury before he forced a strained smile back into place. I have no knowledge of any such allegations, he said, and I find it deeply troubling that someone would attempt to smear a legitimate business initiative with baseless conspiracy theories. Are you denying any connection to Robert Carter's death? Sarah pressed. I never knew the man. That's strange, Sarah said, holding up a document for the cameras. Because we have payroll records showing Robert Carter was employed at a Meridian logistics facility you personally visited 17 times in the 2 years before his death. The war room erupted into stunned, triumphant murmurs as Kessler's carefully constructed narrative began visibly unraveling on live television. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, watching justice she'd never expected to see, finally beginning to take shape, watching her father's death finally being spoken aloud in a room full of people who couldn't be silenced or bought. He's rattled. Marcus said something like awe in his voice. I've never seen Kessler lose control like this in public. It's not over, Adrian said quietly, though something like cautious hope had crept into his voice for the first time since the crisis began. He'll regroup. Men like him always do. But this... He gestured toward the screen where Kessler was now being pressed by multiple reporters, simultaneously security visibly struggling to manage the chaos. This is the first crack in armor he's spent years building, and cracks like this don't close easily. Elena watched the chaos unfold, feeling something complicated settle in her chest. Vindication for her father, fierce satisfaction at watching Kessler squirm under public scrutiny, and underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion from days of relentless crisis that showed no sign of fully resolving. The press conference ended abruptly, Kessler's security team hustling him away from the podium amid a barrage of unanswered questions, and the moment the feed cut, the war room erupted into something between celebration and cautious relief. This isn't a victory yet, Adrian reminded everyone, though there was genuine hope threading through his voice for the first time in what felt like days. But it's the beginning of one. Kessler's going to retaliate. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. As the room began organizing into new strategic conversations, Elena found herself pulled aside by Adrian, guided into a quieter corner, away from the immediate chaos. "You did that," he said quietly. "You found the connection that made this possible." "We did it together," Elena corrected. "Everyone in this building worked to make that happen." "Maybe," Adrian said, "but it was your father's courage 8 years ago, and your refusal to let his death stay buried, that gave us the foundation to build on. That took strength I'm not sure I would have found in your position." Elena felt something warm bloom in her chest, despite the exhaustion weighing down every part of her. "He'd be proud, I think, knowing his work finally mattered." "He should be," Adrian said, and something in the sincerity of his voice made her breath catch slightly. "You're extraordinary, Elena. I don't think I've told you that yet, but you are." The moment stretched between them, charged with everything unspoken since that first night at the clinic, and for a heartbeat, Elena let herself simply exist in it. Let herself feel the pull toward this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly tender man without immediately retreating into caution. Then, Marcus's voice shattered the moment, entirely urgent and sharp enough to send ice through Elena's veins instantly. "Boss, we have a situation. Kessler's people were spotted near the clinic again 20 minutes ago, but this time..." Marcus's face had gone pale, his hands visibly shaking as he held out his phone. This time they weren't just watching. Elena's blood turned to ice. "What happened?" "There's a fire," Marcus said. "The clinic. It's burning right now." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Memories of her father's death, of a warehouse fire that had stolen him from her under eerily similar circumstances, crashing over her all at once. "No," she breathed. "No, no, not the clinic. My patients." "Building was cleared before the fire started," Marcus said quickly. "Some kind of anonymous warning came through 10 minutes before the flames, but Elena..." His expression turned even graver. "The fire department found something inside before the blaze fully took hold. A message spray painted on the wall facing the door. It's addressed to you specifically." "What does it say?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at Adrian before finally answering, his voice heavy with dread. "It says your father should have stayed quiet. So should you." The room went completely silent. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her. 8 years of grief and 4 days of impossible revelation colliding into a single devastating moment of clarity. Kessler wasn't just threatening her anymore. He was telling her in the clearest possible terms that he intended to finish what he'd started 8 years ago in that other fire, the one that had already taken everything from her once before. Adrian's hand found hers, steady and fierce, despite everything. And when she looked up at him, the softness from moments earlier had been replaced entirely by something harder, more dangerous, more resolute. "He just made a mistake," Adrian said quietly, voice deadly calm in a way that promised devastating consequences. "He thinks fear will make you disappear the way it made your father's evidence disappear for 8 years. His grip tightened around her hand. "But you're not going anywhere, Elena, and neither am I. Kessler just declared war on both of us in the worst possible way he could have chosen." Elena stared at the phone in Marcus's hand, at the photograph of her burning clinic, at words designed to break her, the same way losing her father once nearly had. But standing there, surrounded by people who had spent the entire night fighting alongside her, holding the hand of a man who had risked his life to save a kidnapped girl, only hours earlier, she felt something rise inside her that was stronger than fear. "Then let's finish this," she said, voice steadier than she expected. "All the way to the end." The words on that wall burned into Elena's mind long after Marcus lowered his phone, and for a moment, nobody in the war room spoke at all. Then Adrian's voice cut through the silence, low and lethal. "Marcus, I want everyone Kessler has anywhere near that clinic identified by name within the hour. I want to know who gave the order, who carried it out, and I want to know where Kessler is sleeping tonight." Boss going after him directly right now, with everything still this raw? I'm not asking for permission, Adrian said. I'm giving an order. Elena stepped forward, her hand still cold from the shock of what she'd just heard, but her voice steadier than she expected. Wait. Just wait a second. If we go at him with violence right now, isn't that exactly what he wants? Sarah Chen just humiliated him on live television. He's cornered. He's desperate. A man like that doesn't want a quiet fight anymore. He wants chaos because chaos gives him something to hide behind. Adrian turned to her, jaw tight. So your answer is to do nothing while he burns down everything you've built? My answer, Elena said, is that we don't let him choose the battlefield. He wants us angry and reckless. He wants you storming into wherever he's hiding, so it looks like exactly what he just told the entire city: you are a violent criminal who can't control himself. She took a breath, steadying her own fury, even as it screamed inside her chest. We beat him with what already worked tonight. Evidence, exposure. Let the city watch him unravel in public, instead of giving him a private war he can spin into sympathy. Marcus looked between them, something like relief passing over his face at her words. She's right, boss. Sarah Chen is already circling this story. If we feed her the clinic fire, connect it directly to the threat against Elena, against her father, we don't need to touch Kessler with our own hands. We let his own violence be the thing that finally ends him. Adrian's shoulders remained rigid for a long moment, every instinct in him clearly straining against the restraint Elena was asking for. Then slowly, some of the tension eased from his frame, replaced by a grudging, exhausted respect. You're asking me to sit still while a man threatens to kill you the same way he killed your father, he said quietly. I'm asking you to help me make sure he never gets the chance, Elena said. There's a difference. Adrian studied her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Not surrender, not entirely, but the beginning of trust in a plan that didn't rely on bloodshed to prove its strength. Fine, he said finally. We do it your way. For now. But if he makes one more move toward you, Elena, I promise you restraint stops being an option. I wouldn't expect anything less. Marcus was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, calling Sarah Chen directly this time, instead of routing through intermediaries. Elena listened to fragments of the conversation, the clinic fire, the message on the wall. The direct line now visible connecting Kessler to 2 deaths 8 years apart, and felt something like grim satisfaction settle over the exhaustion weighing down her body. She wants to meet in person, Marcus said, lowering the phone. Tonight. She says if this checks out, she's taking it straight to her editor for a follow-up piece before Kessler has time to spin tonight's fire as some random act of vandalism. Then let's not keep her waiting, Elena said. Sarah Chen turned out to be sharper in person than she'd even seemed on screen. A woman in her 50s with tired eyes that missed nothing, and a voice that carried the weight of 15 years spent chasing men exactly like Victor Kessler. She sat across from Elena in a small secured meeting room recorder between them, and listened without interruption as Elena laid out everything: her father's death, the documents Marcus had recovered, the message spray-painted across her burning clinic only hours earlier. This is the most direct evidence I've seen against Kessler in 15 years of trying, Sarah said, finally setting down her pen. Most people who get this close to him don't live long enough to talk to a reporter about it. I'm aware, Elena said. You understand what happens once this runs. He's not going to stop coming after you. If anything, exposure like this makes you more of a target, not less, because now you're not just an inconvenience to him. You're the person who took down his public reputation on national television. Elena felt Adrian shift beside her, tension radiating off him at Sarah's blunt assessment, but she kept her own voice steady. I've spent 8 years thinking my father's death was a tragic accident. I'm not interested in staying quiet just because the truth is dangerous. He already tried to burn down everything I've built once tonight. I'd rather fight him in the light than keep hiding in the dark. Sarah studied her for a long moment, something like genuine respect crossing her weathered features. Your father would be proud of that answer. I hope so. Give me 48 hours, Sarah said, gathering her things. I need to verify everything independently before this runs. I won't publish anything I can't stand behind completely, especially against a man with Kessler's legal resources. But if this holds up the way I think it will, this isn't just a story anymore. This becomes a criminal investigation. Multiple agencies are going to want a piece of this once it's public. 48 hours. Adrian repeated, once Sarah had left his voice tight with barely restrained impatience. That's a long time to stay exposed while Kessler knows we're building a case against him. Then we don't stay exposed, Elena said. We disappear somewhere he can't reach either of us until this breaks. Running isn't exactly my style. Neither is watching someone Elena stopped abruptly, the unfinished sentence hanging heavy in the air between them. Adrian's eyes sharpened, something hopeful and cautious, flickering behind the exhaustion etched into his features. Someone you what, Elena? Her heart hammered against her ribs, the weight of everything unspoken between them finally pressing too hard to contain any longer. Someone I've come to care about, she said quietly. More than I expected to in 4 impossible days that turned my entire life upside down. The words hung between them, fragile and enormous all at once, and for a moment nothing else in the world existed except the careful, searching way Adrian looked at her, like he was trying to memorize this exact instant before the chaos of their lives inevitably crashed back in. Elena. Marcus's voice shattered through the doorway before Adrian could finish, urgent and breathless, in a way that instantly killed whatever tender moment had been building between them. Boss, we have a location on Kessler. He's not at any of his usual properties. Our people tracked him to a private airstrip on the edge of the city. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. He's running. That's what it looks like. Private jet fueling up right now. If he gets in the air, we lose any chance of stopping him before this becomes an international manhunt instead of a local arrest. Elena felt her stomach drop. If he runs, he takes everything with him. Every piece of leverage, every resource he'd need to keep hurting people from somewhere we can't touch him. I know, Adrian said, already moving toward the door, urgency replacing every trace of the vulnerable moment from seconds earlier. Marcus, get the car. We're not letting him disappear. Adrian, wait. Elena grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. If we go after him now before Sarah's story breaks, this looks exactly like what he's been trying to paint you as all along. A criminal chasing down a legitimate businessman. I don't care how it looks, Adrian said. I care about stopping him before he escapes justice completely. Then let me call the police, Elena said. Right now. Anonymous tip about a private jet preparing to flee the city hours after a suspect was publicly confronted with evidence of murder and trafficking. Let law enforcement stop him instead of you. That way it's not your organization committing violence, it's the system finally working the way it should have 8 years ago. Adrian hesitated, torn between instinct and the strategy Elena was offering, every protective impulse in him straining against patience. And if the police are too slow, if he's already in the air before anyone responds, then we'll deal with that, Elena said. But we try this way first, please. Something in her voice, pleading but also fierce with conviction, finally broke through his resistance. Okay, he said. Your way. But I'm coming with you to make that call in person, and if this doesn't work fast enough, I reserve the right to handle it differently. Fair enough. The call to the police went through within minutes, an anonymous tip carefully worded to trigger immediate response without revealing its source. Elena stood beside Adrian in the war room, watching the clock tick forward with agonizing slowness, every second stretching the tension in the room to an almost unbearable pitch. They're not moving fast enough, Adrian muttered, pacing despite his injury, despite the doctor's repeated warnings about tearing his stitches. It's been 12 minutes. Give them time, Elena said, though her own nerves were fraying just as badly. Marcus's phone rang, and the entire room went silent as he answered, listening intently before his face broke into something like disbelief. They got him, he said. Police intercepted the jet on the runway. Kessler's in custody. The room erupted, tension breaking into something like collective relief. But Elena felt herself frozen, almost unable to believe it had actually worked, that the man who had haunted her entire adult life, without her even knowing his name, had finally been stopped. It's not over, Adrian warned, even as something like genuine hope broke through his usual composure. Men like Kessler have lawyers' connections, ways of slipping through cracks in the system. This is a start, not an ending. It's enough of a start, Elena said, feeling tears prick her eyes for the first time all night. Exhaustion and relief crashing over her simultaneously. For tonight, it's enough. The following days moved with a strange, disorienting mixture of chaos and cautious hope. Sarah Chen's story broke exactly as promised, detailed and devastating, connecting Kessler directly to Robert Carter's murder, to the trafficking operations hidden inside Meridian Logistics, to a pattern of violence and corruption spanning nearly a decade. Multiple agencies opened investigations within hours of publication. Kessler's high-priced lawyers fought for bail and lost the evidence too damning, too thoroughly documented to allow any judge to risk releasing him back into the world. Elena watched it all unfold from the safety of Adrian's compound, still processing the whiplash of watching her father's death finally receive the justice it deserved, after 8 long years of believing it had been nothing more than tragic accident. "How are you doing?" Adrian asked one evening, finding her sitting alone in the small office where they'd first reviewed her father's file, the same room where everything had started to feel undeniably real between them. "Honestly, I don't know," Elena admitted. "I spent 8 years grieving a version of my father's death that wasn't even true. Now I have to grieve the real one, the one where he was murdered for trying to do the right thing, and somehow that feels harder, not easier." Adrian settled into the chair across from her, careful of his healing wound, his presence steady and grounding in a way she'd come to rely on more than she wanted to admit. "There's no right way to grieve something like this," he said. "I spent 3 years grieving my wife and brother the wrong way, turning everything into rage because rage was easier than sitting with the actual loss. You don't have to do that. You're allowed to just feel it." Elena studied him, something warm and aching blooming in her chest. "You've changed so much in 4 days. Do you realize that?" "I think you changed me," Adrian said quietly. "I think I was waiting for someone to remind me that feeling something wasn't the same as being weak. I just didn't know I was waiting until you walked into my life covered in a stranger's blood, refusing every excuse to stop caring about people who had nothing to offer you in return." "That's not exactly a romantic image." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "It's the truest one I have." Elena reached across the small space between them, taking his hand the way she had during the darkest moments of the past several days. Except this time, there was no crisis demanding her attention, no emergency stealing the moment away before it could fully breathe. "What happens now?" she asked. "After all of this settles, after the trial, after the headlines fade." "That depends on what you want," Adrian said carefully. "I meant what I told you that first night. I'm not asking you to owe me anything. The foundation position is yours regardless of anything else between us. Your clinic will be rebuilt, fully funded, better protected than it ever was before. None of that depends on whatever this is between us." "That's not what I asked." Adrian's eyes met hers, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering behind years of careful control. "What I want," he said slowly, "is to know if there's a version of this of us that exists outside of crisis and danger and near-death experiences. I don't know how to be anything except intense Elena. I've spent so long as someone who feels nothing that I'm not entirely sure how to exist quietly without an emergency demanding every ounce of my attention." "Then we figure it out together," Elena said. "The same way we figured out everything else this week." Something in Adrian's expression broke open completely, 3 years of careful walls crumbling in the space of a single conversation. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and when she didn't, when she met him halfway. Instead, the kiss that followed felt less like a beginning, and more like an inevitability. Neither of them had been able to outrun since that first rainy night at the clinic. The trial, when it finally came 4 months later, was swift and merciless in its thoroughness. Sarah Chen's investigative work, combined with Robert Carter's meticulous 8-year-old documentation and the corroborating evidence gathered during those chaotic days after the clinic fire, left Kessler's legal team with almost nothing to work with. Daniel's daughter testified quietly, devastating in her account of months held captive. Vincent Ross, true to his word, provided crucial testimony about the internal operations he'd witnessed over years working adjacent to Kessler's network, his own health failing, but his conscience finally painfully clear. Elena sat in the courtroom every single day watching justice unfold with a mixture of grim satisfaction and lingering grief that she suspected would never fully disappear, not completely. Adrian sat beside her throughout a steady, quiet presence, though he'd deliberately kept his own organization's involvement carefully obscured from the proceedings, understanding that his presence in the case needed to remain about supporting Elena, not entangling his own complicated world into a trial built on clean, prosecutable evidence. When the verdict finally came guilty on all counts, including the murder of Robert Carter, Elena felt something inside her finally settle. 8 years of unresolved grief, finding at last a place to rest. "He can't hurt anyone else," she said quietly, sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom afterward. Adrian's hand wrapped tightly around hers. After everything, after all these years, he finally can't hurt anyone else. "No," Adrian agreed. "He can't." Vincent Ross passed away 6 weeks after the trial, concluded his cancer finally claiming him, but not before Adrian made good on his promise, ensuring his daughter and her family were provided for, completely a final act of mercy for a man whose loyalty, however compromised in his final months, had shaped nearly 2 decades of service before desperation broke his resolve. Daniel Whitfield remained with the organization, his daughter slowly healing from months of captivity, his gratitude to Adrian evident in every extra hour of loyal service he offered from that day forward. The clinic rebuilt exactly as Elena had wanted it. Sturdier, better funded, protected. Quietly by resources nobody outside her closest circle fully understood. Reopened 3 months after the fire, serving the same community it always had. Though now, with the added support of a foundation, Elena herself helped run with the same rigorous integrity she'd once lost everything defending. A year passed in a way that felt almost unbelievable to Elena, given how violently her life had been upended in those first 4 impossible days. She split her time between the clinic and the foundation, finding purpose in work that finally aligned with everything she'd always believed about using whatever power she had to help people who had none. Adrian, too, had changed the organization around him in ways that rippled outward through the entire city. Quieter now, less driven by fear, and more by the careful strategic protection of communities that had once feared his name. "You're different," Marcus observed one afternoon, watching Adrian review foundation reports with the same careful attention he'd once reserved only for business ledgers, meant to keep his empire running through intimidation. "Better, I think, though don't let it go to your head." "I had help," Adrian said, glancing toward the window where Elena could be seen in the courtyard below, laughing with a group of children from a program the foundation had recently launched. Something soft crossed his features, an expression Marcus had genuinely never witnessed on his boss's face before the last year began. "Are you going to marry her?" Marcus asked bluntly. Adrian didn't even try to deny the thought had crossed his mind more than once. "When the time is right. Boss, in 11 years I've watched you build an empire through sheer force of will. I think you know when the time is right better than anyone." That evening, Adrian found Elena in the same small office where everything between them had first cracked open, reviewing her father's original file, which she still kept close. A reminder of everything that had brought them to this point. "You still look at that," Adrian observed, settling into the chair across from her. "Every year around this time," Elena admitted. "It helps me remember why all of this matters. Why the work we do matters." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, watching her with an intensity that made her look up from the file. Curiosity flickering across her features at whatever was clearly weighing on him. "I've spent most of my life either building an empire out of fear or destroying myself trying to avenge what fear had already taken from me," he said slowly. 3 years of silence, Elena. 3 years where I genuinely believed I would never feel anything again, that the man I used to be had died right alongside my wife and brother, leaving nothing behind, except someone capable of violence and very little else. Adrian, let me finish, he said gently, because I need you to understand exactly what you gave back to me before I ask you what I'm about to ask you. He reached for her hand steady, despite the vulnerability evident in every line of his face. You didn't just help me stop Kessler. You didn't just help expose the truth about your father, or rescue Daniel's daughter, or force me to find mercy for Vincent, when every instinct told me to choose vengeance instead. You gave me back the parts of myself I thought I'd lost forever. You reminded me that strength and tenderness aren't opposites, that protecting people doesn't require becoming someone incapable of love. Elena felt tears gathering, watching this complicated, dangerous, deeply transformed man lay himself bare in front of her, with a vulnerability that still occasionally stole her breath. I don't know how to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you, Adrian continued, voice rough with emotion he no longer bothered hiding. But I know I don't want to spend whatever time I have left figuring that out with anyone else. Elena Carter, you walked into my life on a night I expected to remain exactly as empty as every night before it, and you changed everything about who I thought I was capable of becoming. He reached into his jacket, producing a small box that made Elena's breath catch entirely. I'm not asking you to marry a mafia boss, he said quietly. I'm asking you to marry the man you helped me remember I could still be. Whatever that man becomes from this point forward, I want to become it with you beside me. Elena stared at the ring, at the man kneeling in front of her, whose entire world had once terrified her, and now felt like the safest place she'd ever known, and she understood with absolute clarity that every impossible, dangerous, transformative moment of the past year had led her exactly here. Yes, she said, voice breaking with the weight of everything the word carried. Yes, Adrian, 1,000 times yes. Hey. 6 months later, the wedding took place in the courtyard of the very foundation building where Elena now spent most of her days, surrounded not by the wealth and power that had once defined Adrian's world, but by the community. Both of them had spent the last year rebuilding together. Nurses from the clinic, children from the foundation's programs, Daniel and his daughter Marcus, standing proudly as Adrian's best man, and dozens of ordinary people whose lives had been touched by the quiet, careful redemption of a man the city had once only known as the Silent King. Reporters had asked in the months following Kessler's conviction and the public unraveling of his empire why Adrian Valenti had suddenly transformed from a feared, isolated figure into someone actively investing in the communities his organization once merely tolerated. Adrian had given careful, measured answers in every interview, protecting the deeper truth of his transformation from public consumption. But standing at the altar, watching Elena walk toward him in the golden light of a late afternoon that felt like the culmination of everything broken finally being made whole, Adrian understood the real answer with a clarity that settled deep into his bones. He hadn't changed because of strategy or public relations or careful calculation. He had changed because one woman with nothing to offer him except honesty and compassion had refused to let him remain the empty, silent man 3 years of grief had turned him into. She had walked into a bloodied room and chosen to save a stranger's life without hesitation, and in doing so, she had inadvertently saved his as well. I, Adrian, take you, Elena, he said, voice steady and sure, in a way it hadn't been in over 3 years, to be my partner in everything that comes next. The joy, the difficulty, the quiet mornings, and the moments that test us. I promise to never again let silence be the answer to grief. I promise to keep choosing compassion the way you taught me to for as long as I live. Elena, tears streaming freely down her face, repeated her own vows with a certainty that came from having weathered the very worst life could offer and found on the other side of it something worth every impossible risk they'd taken to get here. When the ceremony ended and the crowd erupted into applause, Adrian pulled Elena close, resting his forehead against hers. 3 years of silence, finally completely broken by a life filled with everything he'd once believed himself incapable of feeling again. 3 years, he whispered, just for her. 3 years I thought I'd never speak again. Not really, not from anywhere that mattered. And then you walked into my life and gave me back my voice. You gave yourself that back, Elena whispered in return. I just reminded you it was still there. Around them, the community they had built together continued celebrating survivors and volunteers. Reformed men who had once served fear, now serving something better. Children laughing in a courtyard that had once been nothing more than another cold headquarters in a criminal empire, now transformed into a place of genuine hope. Victor Kessler remained exactly where he belonged, behind bars for the rest of his life. His empire dismantled piece by investigators who had finally, after years of failed attempts, by better resourced agencies, found enough evidence to end his reign of quiet, calculated violence for good. Robert Carter's name, once nearly forgotten in a case ruled accidental by investigators who either couldn't or wouldn't look deeper, now stood permanently recorded as exactly what he had always been: a man of extraordinary courage, who died trying to protect people he would never meet, whose sacrifice ultimately became the foundation for the very justice that finally caught up with the man who killed him. And Adrian Valenti, once known throughout the city only as a man without mercy, a silent king ruling through fear alone, had become something far more powerful than the empire he once commanded through violence. He had become, at long last, simply a man capable of love. Again, steady, transformed, and utterly certain that the woman standing beside him had given him back everything 3 years of grief had once convinced him was lost forever. The city that once whispered his name in fear now spoke it with something closer to respect, watching a man once defined entirely by cold silence build something lasting out of compassion instead. And every single person who had witnessed his transformation understood the same simple truth Elena had known from the very first night she refused to walk away from a stranger bleeding on her clinic floor. Real strength was never about how much fear a person could command. It was about how much love a person was still brave enough to choose, even after everything in their life had once convinced them love was a luxury they could no longer afford. Adrian Valenti had finally completely broken his silence, and this time it was forever.